Session 55. Good evening, cohorts. I see that we are having a quiet session with no visitors. It is truly a lovely spring evening, and the rubric is correct. I do enjoy the blinds open also. The cells and molecules forming their psychic gestalt into a particular human physical structure are separated from what you might call the outer environment, and yet they are also connected to the outer environment more than they are separated from it. It is the inner ego, and the inner vitality, and the inner ego's determination, along with the cooperation of all the cells that compose the physical body, that enables such a particular structure as the human body to exist as a separate construction, and to maintain the necessary sense of identity. In actuality, since all atoms and molecules possess the potentiality to form in so many varieties, and since the atoms and molecules possess their own generalized consciousness, there is basically a strong inner cohesion and relationship between all cells and molecules, regardless of their patterned structure formation, and the human structure is connected to all other such psychophysical constructions. Without the determination of the inner ego, cohesion of identity would be impossible. The self as you know it is many things, and contains many more vestibules and rooms than you now imagine. Even the outer ego contains multitudinous chambers and interconnections of which you are unaware. The important point here is that identity cohesion is projected upon the human physical structure from within, that is, from the inner ego by way of the inner senses. This, of course, includes the consciousness also, that is inherent in the separate molecules and atoms that compose the cells. The physical structure alone is simply not divided from other structures in the manner which you perceive it to be through use of the outer senses. The outer senses are usually considered mainly as perceptive organs, enabling you to experience reality as it is. My dear friends, I have been waiting to tell you for some time that in a very true sense, the outer senses can be regarded as inhibitors. The fact remains that the outer senses induce a conscious focusing along certain limited lines, grouping perceptions and comprehensions in a narrow fashion, and limiting the practical and imaginative range that consciousness might otherwise take. With these sessions, you are yourselves broadening the range of your own consciousness, and therefore of your own abilities, with my help. Using the outer senses, you are more or less forced to conceive idea groups only within the scope of perceptions received by the outer senses. It is true that use of the outer senses, and full joyful use, is necessary on your plan. Not only necessary, but beneficial, and the means toward various kinds of value fulfillment. Nevertheless, their range is severely limited. It is as if you were sent into some strange and fascinating meadow, and given only the sense of sight. Imagine what you would miss: the odor of the fresh earth, the sounds, the touch of earth beneath your feet, of sun upon your back, using only the sense of smell. You would also be severely limited. Yet, you are more limited than this by far. It is important for the race of men now to begin to use and experiment with the inner senses, since for the potentialities of humanity to be fully realized, new concepts must arise which cannot arise in the limited scope he now permits himself. Because the cells and the molecules in general have consciousness, because they contain within themselves a capsule comprehension of the universe as a whole, and because they contain the ability to form into an almost infinite variety of form. There is a kinship between every atom and molecule, a basic enduring connection, regardless of the separate appearance which is seen using the outer senses. Because I have given you such excellent material, you may take your first break with light hearts. The boundaries, limitations, extent and vistas of the self are merely arbitrary. In a very true sense, each self is infinite, unbounded, connected in a most intimate way to all other things in the universe on your plane, and through the inner senses and the inner ego connected also in a most intimate way to the unknown and the unseen inner universe. Here, we run into something that will be difficult for me to explain to you. Any particular self theoretically could expand his consciousness to contain the universe and everything in it. The closed-in, solitary, isolated self of which you are so proud is, as I have said, an arbitrary formation, containing the core of identity, and you seem to prefer, psychically speaking, to stay at home. Because of the basic simplicity of the elements in your universe, and for other reasons already mentioned, there is no real boundary, neither chemical, electrical, or even psychic, between the self and what is usually considered not self. Chemically in particular, the dependence of the physical body and the self to the planetary environment is obvious. It is known to you scientists that the chemical relationship between the personal physical self and the chemical environment of the not-self is intimately connected. In the same manner that you are dependent upon, say, green plants for your very physical survival, so the interdependence and the connections continue in all other fields. The physical construction of your universe, as I have said, is carried on by all life, not just human life. Each psycho-physical pattern of existence does its part in continuing the maintenance and the renewing construction of the physical universe. Man, staying within the core of his arbitrarily designated selfhood, can in truth be compared to early physical man, cowering within his cave. You have learned to venture forth into the physical universe. You have not learned to venture forth from an arbitrarily designated selfhood into an extended environment that knows no space or time. Such a possibility, such a future development, in no way involves a denial of self, a dissolving or sweeping away of self, an annihilation of self. Many cavemen doubtlessly feared for their personal survival when they ventured forth upon the earth in daylight. They feared that their selves would be annihilated. Such a development as we are considering involves instead an expansion or extension, in the same manner that the expanding universe takes up no space, but expands in terms of value fulfillment. So the expanding consciousness would take up no space, but would also expand in terms of value fulfillment. This is your new frontier, your new challenge. This arbitrary limitation set upon the individual self is put upon it by its reliance upon the outer senses, as a method of perceiving reality. The outer senses are excellent tools of perceptions for limited circumstances. However, man has relied upon them so long, and with such cradling dependence, that now they threaten to hamper his own growth and development. I have mentioned that the individual cells and molecules, atoms and other basic structures, definitely gain in their formation into the gestalt of a more complicated structure, being able to participate in experiences and value fulfillments that would otherwise not be possible for them in their own simpler isolated form. This is of prime importance. The expanding self, ideally, would reach out beyond the arbitrary boundaries it has placed upon itself. Again, there just is not any particular boundary between what is self and what is not self. There are gradations, and that is all. The skin is as much, if not more, a necessary connective as it is a boundary. I suggest you take your break. This material may get slightly more difficult. It is actually so beautifully simple. Only the need to translate conceptions into words causes any complications. The isolated self, as you know it, can indeed be well compared to man's early caves. In terms of fulfillment, the species expanded its potential tremendously when it left the caves, and so will man also experience the fulfillment of still unglimpsed potentialities when he walks forth from the cave of the arbitrarily limited self. Rob noted. Jane laughed. She said, I shouldn't have to say this. The image is truly astounding and ludicrous. However, as your expanding universe does not expand in space, so your expanded self will not grow in space to amazing proportions of pounds and tons. When you realize that the self has no boundaries, then you can begin to make progress. Since consciousness to begin with does not exist in space, then there is no reason why the consciousness cannot so expand beyond its set limitations, and theoretically continue to do so. Such an expansion would give excellent impetus and value experience to those basic components, the cells and molecules, experience that would be retained and utilized. When so-called space travel becomes truly popular, truly practical, it will come along these lines. The self will truly utilize the atoms and molecules. The consciousness will travel by this method. The particular physical body will then be known for what it is. A cooperative psychic gestalt, a psychophysical structure formed together by the inner ego, utilizing atoms and molecules that are in themselves living and conscious. We will be deliberate for a moment to get this material through, since I know it is difficult for you. I want to make these points to lead up to the main one. Consciousness comes first and forms the physical body in ways that I have described. Nevertheless, there are no real boundaries that separate self from non-self. The outer senses, because they have been so dependently and almost absolutely relied upon, act as blinders, limiting the fields of perception that are possible, and therefore hampering both imagination and intellect in the formation of new concepts. Now, space travel, when it occurs, will utilize expansion of self. Your idea of that is based upon your dependence upon the outer senses. You will learn that it is possible, through no physical act, to relinquish the physical body, expand the self, using atoms and molecules as stepping stones to a given destination, and reforming the physical body at the other end. This must most certainly sound outlandish to you. Nevertheless, I will never refrain from giving you the facts, regardless of your reactions at the time, as you will come to see how this idea in particular is not unthinkable, but feasible. The point of difficulty is your panicky and protective huddling within the core of a limited self, and you fear to set aside the endless doors between self and what seems to be not self, that you yourself have erected. In the beginning, entry to your plane requires a simple energy unit, a sperm, a simple but potent capsule that contains all the future potentiality. After entry into your plane, the self or identity, the consciousness, without any physical act, can leave the physical body, expand, travel through the medium of atoms and molecules, and completely reassemble. This seems strange because you do not fully comprehend that the energy, the vitality that is individualized into consciousness forms the physical body. The once it appears on your plane, it can leave the body and reassemble itself. It will represent no more in one way to the atoms and molecules through which it passed, than the wine that passes through the tree tops. But as the mind represents, and it does, motion and excitement to the trees, so would the consciousness, as it rustled through the cells and molecules of so-called space, represent refreshing experience and momentary new satisfactions. Fear is all that holds you back. You will most probably work out a physical, technical way of making this possible before you realize that you could have done it all alone. I mentioned space travel because I know that you are interested in it. But this is only one example, and a spectacular one to catch your interest, of the advantages of extension of self. I am sorry I forgot your break. Take it by all means. Your scientists will very soon discover that the self has no real boundaries, but they will not think of the implications involved on their own for quite a while. Part of the limitations set upon the self are cultural and vary according to civilizations, but the basic cause is the absolute reliance upon the outer senses. Even when your own technical advancements prove beyond doubt that in many cases the evidence of your own outer senses is wrong and does not represent reality, but represents an arbitrary pattern focused upon reality. Through the outer senses, you must always see reality in arbitrary, really unchanging terms, and reality can simply not be held within such boundaries. This extension of self will occur in some degree before any real effective brothership of man is accomplished. This is unfortunate but true. The self begins learning its arbitrary limitations at the same time that it tries expansion in childhood. If the cultural limitations were lifted, this would at least be of some benefit. The consciousness with its source in the inner universe, being not bound by time or space, is in a position to expand along the lines that I have mentioned. The physical body in a large degree is not. Do not mistake me. For practical purposes, theory aside, you could not maintain allegiance to your plan, live out a normal lifespan, for example. Ralph noted, and this is necessary. They said, while separate from the physical body. Nevertheless, you can leave the physical body and reassemble it. I am sorry to say that if you have a bad gallbladder, the reassembled body will also have a bad gallbladder, since it is the consciousness who has caused the illness to begin with. Even if you leave the body momentarily, you do not leave your problems behind, or at least you must come back to them. I have promised to give you some material dealing with the method by which all species and all living things cooperate in maintaining and constantly renewing the physical construction of your universe. And you will see that some of tonight's material should give you insights into this matter. The various species and the multitudinous varieties of life in your universe could with much validity be compared to cells, organs, or limbs of some gigantic creature. There is no reason to feel that man is insignificant, or that the individual is important, or at the mercy of forces he can neither perceive nor comprehend. To the contrary, the individual, any individual, is supremely important, necessary, and his or even its ability to use its energy constructively. But most of all, to expand in terms of value fulfillment is more vital than I can say. Ralph asked, why is my hand still fat? They said, I have endeavored to add an extra perspective this evening to the session. As far as sensations for both of you and Rupert are concerned, the extension or expansion of self momentarily and initially involves a slight expansion of tissue. I believe that you both have experienced this at various times, to varying degrees. There is a temporary and initial, barely perceivable enlargement, a deep pulsing in the manner of a beating forth of cells and molecules, actually a sort of pulsation resulting in a minute but definite enlargement of tissue. You experience this in slow motion. Completed, the process would represent what would appear to be a propulsion of consciousness or self from the tissues. Now, since the identity consciousness is composed of the combined and cooperating generalized consciousness of all the body's atoms and molecules, and the consciousness of the inner ego, this molecule consciousness that once or initially found expression in forming their physical construction, no longer do so, but are competent to do so again when the self-consciousness so demands. Ralph noted my hand phenomenon still persisted, and now involved the left as well. As far as duration was concerned, this experience, of course, far exceeded any previous one. They said the combined molecule consciousnesses, retaining identity, form a gestalt consciousness that is the ego, the alter ego, that is in turn utilized by the consciousness of the inner ego. The inner ego being unhampered by the laws of your plan. Once having entered your plan at physical birth, can therefore leave the physical body and then reconstruct it. Since the conscious ego is composed of the gestalt molecule consciousness, then when it leaves the physical body, it takes the molecule consciousness with it. And this molecule consciousness is therefore present to aid in future construction. However, since you must deal with physical laws while dwelling upon the physical plane, you cannot dispense entirely with the physical constructions. But in such extensions of consciousness, you must utilize other physical molecules and atoms. I have said that this will involve these other molecules and atoms only in so far as a wind blows through the treetops. My most beloved friends, this is one of our best sessions to date. I think of you most highly and I respect you both, not only as excellent pupils, but as dearest friends. I will hereby close the session. Let me tell you, Joseph, that your room divider has proven of great psychic value to you both, and you have not had any gun boils since I suggested putting the refrigerator in the kitchen. I look forward to many delightful summer sessions, although we will make allowances whenever you request. Ross said good night, Seth. Jane said good night, Seth.